Shiraishi was the kind of guy no one ever noticed, not because he wanted to be invisible, but because he was, with a face so forgettable and a presence so faint, he might as well have been an NPC in real life. In fact, he had mastered the art of aura suppression so well, even his teachers barely acknowledged him, until he physically tapped one on the shoulder. But everything changed one day, when the most popular girl in school, Kubo, decided to make him her social experiment. It all started one quiet afternoon. Shiraishi sat at his desk, Googling what NPC energy meant, trying to understand why people acted like he didn't exist. That's when Kubo showed up. She peeked over his shoulder, curious, and before he could explain, snap, she took a picture of him. Shiraishi was mortified. He begged her to delete it, but she refused. Then, class started, and Kubo, ever mischievous, said she wanted to test his invisibility. Her idea? Get him to stand up during the lesson and raise a leg, just to see if anyone would react. Shiraishi, of course, refused, but Kubo had leverage, the photo. Backed into a corner, he gave in. He stood on his chair, lifted one leg like a flamingo, and waited. No one noticed, not a single glance, until the teacher turned, eyes narrowing. "This isn't ballet class. Sit down." And just like that, every pair of eyes turned to him. Shiraishi practically died of embarrassment. When class ended, Kubo congratulated him on his 5 seconds of fame, but it wasn't enough. She kept teasing him until her friends called her away, leaving Shiraishi alone, stewing in awkward silence. Later that day, Kubo and her friends, Tama and Hazuki, chatted about him. Tama said she'd seen him twice in one day, and Hazuki joked that spotting Shiraishi was like finding a rare mythical creature. Kubo didn't say anything, but deep down, she started wondering, why was it so hard for everyone else to even notice him? The next morning, Kubo greeted Shiraishi at the school gates, but he didn't notice her at all. That really ticked her off. Later, in class, Kubo pouted so hard he had to comment. "You look like a marshmallow," he said, offering her his milk as a peace offering. But she wasn't letting it go. He didn't greet her that morning, and she declared he needed to be punished. So what did she do? She plopped herself down onto his lap, in the middle of class, like it was Christmas and he was Santa Claus. Shiraishi froze. Every nerve in his body lit up, and yet, no one noticed. When she finally stood up, she just giggled at the dazed look on his face. That day, when the teacher asked a question, Kubo raised her hand, but instead of answering, she volunteered Shiraishi. He panicked. He had no idea what to say. Luckily, Kubo held up her notebook just enough for him to copy the answer. Crisis averted. After class, she tried to get his pine contact, but her friends cut the conversation short, dragging her off for weekend plans. That evening, Shiraishi sat alone in the park when Kubo found him again. She tried taking a picture of him, but it came out blurry, so she suggested a selfie. They took one together, and right after, she asked for his contact again. This time, he gave it. Before leaving, she messaged him the photo and asked if he'd like to hang out again sometime. His quiet yes made her day. So much that even her sister's teasing couldn't wipe the smile off her face. The following week, after a brutal gym class, Shiraishi was gasping for air like a suffocating pig. He had barely survived a few laps around the track, and being the least athletic guy in class definitely wasn't helping. Leaning against a wall, still catching his breath, he didn't even notice Kubo approaching, until she was right in front of him, flashing her usual teasing smile. Instinctively, Shiraishi backed away. He knew he reeked of sweat and didn't want her to suffer through that public bathroom-level stench. But when he awkwardly confessed his worries, Kubo only stepped closer and, to his horror, sniffed him like a curious puppy. And instead of gagging, she smiled. "I like your smell," she said cheerfully, making Shiraishi stumble back, completely flustered. Without missing a beat, Kubo dashed off and returned a few minutes later with a perfumed towel. She pressed it against his sweaty cheek, laughing at his reaction. "Here," she said, "use this. Better than smelling like a trash can." Still burning with embarrassment, Shiraishi wiped himself off, noticing that Kubo kept staring at him. "Do I look like Chris Hemsworth now, or what?" he joked nervously. Kubo chuckled and told him not to get delusional. He just smelled decent now. Later that week, Shiraishi headed to a local bookstore to pick up the newest volume of his favorite manga. As he stood awkwardly outside the store, Kubo happened to pass by. Spotting him, she hid behind a nearby lamppost, quietly observing. She watched as Shiraishi struggled with the automatic doors, waving his arms around like a confused inflatable tube man, before finally realizing it was a button-operated door. Mortified, he pressed the button and shuffled inside, just as a couple casually walked past him without even noticing he was there. Kubo finally revealed herself and helped him with the door, shaking her head in amusement. Inside the store, she asked what he was there for. Shiraishi, slightly embarrassed, admitted he was after the latest volume of his favorite series. Hearing how passionate he was, Kubo decided to buy the first volume to read it herself. But sadly, the store was out of stock. With a mischievous grin, she turned to him. "Could you bring me yours tomorrow?" Shiraishi shyly agreed. As they left the bookstore, they discovered they actually lived in the same neighborhood. Kubo teased him, saying she would follow him home to borrow the manga. Shiraishi's mind immediately went to less wholesome scenarios, but Kubo quickly clarified. She only wanted the book, nothing else. That evening, Shiraishi nervously handed her a bag containing the manga. She then casually asked what time he usually left for school in the morning. "About 8 a.m., he replied, still suspicious. "Don't worry about it," Kubo said with a wink before waving goodbye. But she had her own secret plans. The next morning, Kubo woke up early, spent extra time fixing her hair, and even stole a spritz of her sister's fancy hairspray. Her sister Akina noticed something was up immediately. "Big day at school?" Akina teased. "Nothing special," Kubo replied way too quickly. Akina wasn't fooled. She poked Kubo's hair, teasing her relentlessly about running off to meet her crush, leaving Kubo red-faced as she hurried out the door. She waited patiently at the corner where she knew Shiraishi would pass by. When he appeared, he was surprised, but didn't question it. They walked together silently toward school. Since they were early, Kubo suggested they sit on a bench to kill time. As they chatted, Tama and Hazuki showed up, joining the conversation, completely ignoring Shiraishi at first. Only when Kubo called their attention to him did they even realize he was there. "Oh hey," they said awkwardly. Feeling like the unwanted extra, Shiraishi politely excused himself. Later that afternoon, on his way home, Shiraishi was hit by a splash of muddy water from a passing car. His clothes were ruined, but he shrugged it off. At least with his invisibility, no one would notice. Unfortunately for him, Kubo noticed. She popped up out of nowhere, teasing him mercilessly about his muddy disaster. After laughing at his misery, she offered to walk home with him once again. And Shiraishi, heart pounding a little faster than before, accepted. After walking Kubo home, Shiraishi headed back to his own house, only to realize he forgot his key. He wrestled with the door helplessly, the noise catching Kubo's attention. She came running back and asked what was wrong. Embarrassed, Shiraishi explained his situation. He texted his mom to see when she'd be back, and the answer wasn't comforting. 2 hours. Rather than waiting miserably, Shiraishi decided he'd go to the park and wash off the mud somehow. But Kubo had a better idea. "Why don't you come to my house instead?" Minutes later, Shiraishi found himself inside Kubo's place. She handed him a fresh towel and a hoodie to wear while he cleaned up. After showering, he met Kubo waiting politely by the door. Shiraishi thanked her profusely and promised to return the hoodie the next day. True to his word, Shiraishi brought the hoodie back to school. When he handed it over, Kubo casually asked his height. 5'4", he replied. Kubo grinned mischievously, claiming she was 5'3". She then cheekily stood on the stairs to make herself seem taller, standing face to face with him. "This is the perfect height difference for a couple," she teased. Shiraishi awkwardly argued that the boy should be taller, but Kubo shut him down immediately, citing Meliodas and Elizabeth as proof that height didn't matter. She then asked if he wanted to be taller. Shiraishi, without thinking, nodded. With a playful smirk, Kubo stepped back down and said she liked their height difference just fine. Weeks passed. One afternoon, Kubo tried chatting with Shiraishi, but he excused himself. He had plans. Plans? Kubo couldn't focus for the rest of the day. Tama and Hazuki tried talking to her, but she was completely distracted, wondering where Shiraishi could possibly be going. Later that day, a woman walking through the park spotted a little boy building a snowman. Curious, she approached, only for Shiraishi to materialize out of thin air beside him. It turned out that the boy was Seda, Shiraishi's younger brother. The woman, startled by Shiraishi's sudden appearance, left quickly. Shiraishi sat down on a bench, quietly watching Seda play in the snow. Even though he was shivering from the cold, he didn't have the heart to drag his little brother away. Just then, Kubo showed up, pressing a warm can of hot chocolate against his freezing cheek. Shiraishi almost jumped out of his skin. Seda ran over, clinging to Shiraishi's coat. Introducing them, Shiraishi watched as Kubo crouched down to Seda's level. Seda noticed the drink in her hand and immediately asked for it with sparkling eyes. Shiraishi tried to refuse, but Kubo smiled and handed it over. After Seda took a few happy sips, he insisted that Kubo drink some too. Smiling warmly, she took a sip to make him happy. Then Seda offered the can to Shiraishi. Flustered, Shiraishi tried to decline, but one look at Seda's puppy dog eyes broke him. He pretended to take a sip, his face burning red. Kubo couldn't resist teasing him. "Scared of your first indirect kiss?" Shiraishi, completely embarrassed, mumbled a denial and shuffled a few feet away. That weekend, Shiraishi visited a bookstore far from his neighborhood. His goal? To secretly buy a manga magazine featuring a bikini model on the cover, without anyone he knew catching him. Once inside, he struggled to reach the magazine since no one noticed him enough to move aside. Eventually, he waited until the crowd cleared out and grabbed his prize. But then, something caught his eye, an adult magazine nearby. At first, he resisted temptation, telling himself he wasn't that desperate. But then he remembered no one could see him anyway. What harm could there be in a little peek? Just as he was about to open it, a voice called out. Akina, Kubo's mischievous sister, stood right behind him, arms crossed, smirking. "Aren't you a little too immature for this kind of reading?" Caught red-handed, Shiraishi panicked and quickly shoved the magazine back onto the shelf. He stammered some pathetic excuse about just trying to tidy up the misplaced magazine, but Akina wasn't buying it for a second. She teased him mercilessly, joking that he was trying to enter adulthood through very questionable means. Still red-faced, Shiraishi noticed something strange. How had Akina even noticed him when most people couldn't? That's when he spotted it, the ID badge pinned to her jacket. Believe it or not, Shiraishi didn't even stop to think that Kubo and Akina might be related. Nope, his genius conclusion. Only people with the same name as Kubo could see him. Later, after paying for his magazine, Shiraishi accidentally dropped his school ID on the floor. Akina picked it up and took it home, handing it over to Kubo that evening. When Kubo saw the name Shiraishi on the ID, she immediately asked Akina where she found it. Akina casually explained, "Oh, the guy was drooling over a lewd magazine with a big-chested girl on the cover." Hearing this crushed Kubo's self-esteem. After all, she was as flat as a runway. The next day at school, Kubo cornered Shiraishi before returning his ID. But before handing it back, she asked, "So, do you like girls with huge melons?" Shiraishi nearly had a heart attack. Did she see him at the bookstore? But then it clicked. Akina said she found the ID, which meant the bookstore clerk was Akina. Embarrassed beyond belief, Shiraishi struggled to make eye contact. Surprisingly, Kubo didn't tease him too much. She simply tossed his ID back and called him a cultural degenerate before walking away. A few days later, right before Christmas break, Kubo casually asked Shiraishi if he had plans for Christmas. Spoiler, he didn't, so she invited him to spend the day with her, and he nervously agreed. On Christmas Day, Shiraishi was so anxious that he arrived at the station 30 minutes early. When Kubo finally showed up, she apologized for being late. Shiraishi, trying to play it cool, lied and said he had just arrived too. But Kubo wasn't buying it. She grabbed his ice-cold hands, proving he'd been waiting there in the cold all along. Without saying much, she handed him a gift bag. Confused, Shiraishi asked why she was giving him a present. She said it was because she wanted to exchange gifts. Panic mode activated. Shiraishi hadn't brought anything for her. Kubo, ever patient, gave him 30 minutes to go find something. Running through the shopping mall like a madman, Shiraishi struggled to find the perfect gift. Nothing seemed good enough. But then he thought about Kubo waiting outside, freezing, and an idea hit him. When he returned, he apologized and handed her a small box. Inside was a pair of warm gloves. Kubo's heart melted immediately. She then sheepishly admitted that her gift was kinda dumb. It was a bright yellow t-shirt that said main character across the chest. Shiraishi didn't mind at all. He smiled and said it was the thought that counted, and together they went off into the snowy night. After winter break, school resumed, and Shiraishi was back to his usual wallflower ways. As Kubo entered the classroom with her friends, they started chatting about Valentine's Day. But Shiraishi wasn't paying attention. Something about Kubo was different. He couldn't quite put his finger on it. Without even realizing it, he stared at her until she noticed and marched over. "Why are you looking at me like I'm the girl of your dreams?" she teased. Flustered, Shiraishi stammered some excuse about looking at something else. Kubo let it slide this time. Later, during class, Kubo was tasked with putting up some papers on the bulletin board. She asked Shiraishi to keep her company while she worked. Feeling nervous, Shiraishi worried she'd notice his mismatched socks. He figured the best way to avoid embarrassment was to climb up on a chair where she couldn't see his feet. Before he could act, Kubo spoke up, "Don't be shy about your style. Embrace your fashion sense." Stunned silent, Shiraishi froze in place while Kubo climbed the chair herself. While she was pinning the papers, Shiraishi finally realized what felt different. Kubo was wearing tights instead of her usual socks. Accidentally, he blurted it out. Kubo, amused, explained that her socks had gotten wet that morning, so she wore tights instead. She then curled up on the chair, pulling her knees to her chest, and mischievously asked, "So, are my legs that attractive? Is that why you keep staring?" Red-faced, Shiraishi tried to explain himself, but Kubo interrupted with a grin, "Don't worry, I won't tell anyone you're a thigh fetishist." Then she casually went back to work, leaving Shiraishi sitting there, dying of embarrassment. One afternoon, Kubo suddenly asked Shiraishi if he had ever bought one of those special convenience store drinks that came with collectible cups. He said yes, and for some reason, Kubo lit up with excitement. She immediately asked if they could stop by the store together on the way home. Shiraishi, overwhelmed by how close she was standing, instinctively backed up, but ultimately agreed. At the store, Kubo eagerly scanned the options, struggling to choose a drink. While she debated, she casually asked Shiraishi what he recommended. Thinking about how he and his little brother Seda always bought 2 drinks to share, he was about to suggest that. But before he could, Kubo, as if reading his mind, suggested they do exactly that. Flustered, Shiraishi decided to buy a meat bun instead, suspicious that Kubo might have some secret plan. At the counter, Kubo hesitated when asked which cup size she wanted. Shiraishi advised her to go with a regular, and she followed his lead. She even cheekily ordered his meat bun for herself without the clerk noticing. Walking home, Kubo offered Shiraishi a sip of her drink. When he refused, she grinned mischievously and took a big bite out of his meat bun. Shiraishi just stood there, frozen, as she skipped ahead with his food. While standing alone, replaying the moment over and over in his head, 2 girls accidentally bumped into him, knocking his meat bun to the ground. Poor guy just couldn't catch a break. Fast forward a week. Valentine's Day. Not that it meant much to Shiraishi. He had never received chocolates before. Not even those obligatory ones teachers hand out. One year, his teacher even forgot he existed. So when he found a chocolate cookie tucked inside his locker, he immediately assumed it was a mistake, or worse, a prank. Before he could spiral too hard, Kubo appeared, noticing his panicked expression. Startled, Shiraishi blurted out that nothing was wrong and awkwardly changed the subject to the weather. Later, after class, Kubo slyly asked if anyone had given him chocolates. He said no, only for her to point out that someone had left a treat in his locker. Maybe, just maybe, it really was for him. Turns out, Kubo had bought ingredients to make chocolates the day before. Unfortunately, her baking skills were tragic. The first batch looked more like the ashes of her hopes and dreams than actual cookies. Her sister Akina tried to be supportive, but even she grimaced after tasting one. Refusing to give up, Akina helped her with the next batch and finally, success. Kubo made a batch that was edible and actually tasted good. She packaged them into cute little bags, feeling proud, though Akina couldn't resist teasing her mercilessly. A few days later, Shiraishi went up to the school rooftop to eat lunch alone. Of course, like a loyal puppy, Kubo found him almost immediately. When Shiraishi asked why she would waste her lunch break with a social reject, she casually replied, "My friends are busy, so you're my backup plan." Ouch. Still, he couldn't say no when she offered him one of her homemade omelette rolls. At first, he resisted letting her feed him directly, grabbing the food from her instead. But when he awkwardly tried to feed her back, the piece he held out was way too big, making her pout. Still, she took a bite, surprising him. Then he finally tasted her cooking, and to his amazement, it was delicious. Kubo proudly declared that she made it all by herself, despite Akina insisting she couldn't cook to save her life. Laughing together, Kubo even promised to make a full homemade bento for him someday. She asked about his favorite foods, taking mental notes. Later that afternoon, Kubo and her friends stopped by a cafe. While there, Futaba teased Kubo, saying she seemed different lately. Maybe, just maybe, she was falling in love. Before Kubo could respond, Hazuki interrupted, declaring that there was no way Kubo could be in love. After all, her brain was still operating at baby level, totally incapable of handling complex emotions like love. Kubo just smiled quietly. But deep down, she knew she wasn't the same girl she was before she met Shiraishi. One afternoon, Tama made a cheeky comment. It was a shame that Kubo, despite being so pretty, still hadn't gotten her first kiss. Tama then immediately offered to fix that by kissing her herself, but Hazuki quickly pulled her back down into her seat. Not long after, Hazuki asked Kubo if she was interested in someone, not necessarily a crush, just curious eyes. Blushing slightly, Kubo admitted that her eyes had been following someone lately, Shiraishi. The girls were stunned. Tama, heartbroken, demanded to know what Kubo even saw in Shiraishi. She ranted that he was uglier than the wicked stepsisters from Cinderella and clumsier than a headless chicken. Kubo wasn't having it. She defended Shiraishi fiercely, saying Tama had no right to judge someone she didn't even know properly. The guilt hit Tama hard. She immediately burst into tears, apologizing dramatically for every mean thing she had said about Shiraishi. Kubo forgave her, of course, because that's just the kind of girl she was. A few days later, Shiraishi arrived at school early, expecting a quiet morning. To his surprise, Kubo was already there, sitting at her desk. They had both thought the same thing. Enjoy the peace and quiet. Kubo grinned and suggested they listen to music together. She slipped one earbud into his ear, sat beside him, and they shared a quiet moment, listening side by side. After one song finished, Kubo nudged him to pick something from his own playlist. Embarrassed, Shiraishi chose an anime opening, and when Kubo recognized it as the manga he had given her before, she confessed she actually enjoyed it. Excited, Shiraishi began passionately rambling about his favorite parts of the series, while Kubo smiled, listening intently. Later that evening, Kubo was so absorbed in binge-watching the anime recommendation that she completely ignored Akina's relentless teasing at home. Meanwhile, at Shiraishi's house, he realized that White Day was coming up. Determined not to mess it up, he decided to buy chocolates for the person who had given him a treat on Valentine's Day. The next day at school, nervously, he pulled Kubo aside and awkwardly handed her the chocolates. But to his confusion, he asked her to deliver them to the person who had given him the Valentine's cookie. Kubo was bewildered and maybe a little hurt. She laughed it off, teasingly asking why he hadn't just handed it over in class where no one would notice. Shiraishi felt like a complete idiot, but Kubo reassured him, joking that she thought he was about to confess his love right there. Poor Shiraishi practically malfunctioned on the spot, stuttering like a broken robot, much to Kubo's amusement. Before they parted ways, Shiraishi asked if Kubo could reveal the identity of his Valentine. Kubo only gave him a vague, playful answer, far too subtle for someone as dense as him to catch. A few days later, as Shiraishi walked home, he accidentally dropped his scarf. A young girl picked it up and returned it to him, surprising him. She looked oddly familiar. Moments later, Akina appeared beside her, and everything clicked. Akina teased Shiraishi, asking if Kubo had already returned his lost ID, and then introduced the young girl as their cousin, Sae. After a quick introduction, Sae cheekily asked Shiraishi if he thought she was as cute as Kubo when she was younger. Awkwardly, Shiraishi mumbled a yes. Satisfied, he promised to reward him for his honesty, with a rare photo of Kubo from her childhood, and even exchanged contacts with him. Later, at Kubo's house, Sae and Akina teased her relentlessly, telling her about their meeting with Shiraishi. Sae pouted, feeling left out of the teasing fun, while Kubo secretly smiled at hearing Shiraishi had praised her. Meanwhile, back at Shiraishi's house, he was having dinner with his family when his mom gave him an ultimatum. If he failed his final exams, she would confiscate his video games. Terrified, Shiraishi marched to the library after school the next day to study. But try as he might, he couldn't understand a single thing. His brain was about as useful as a soggy rice ball. As he was struggling, Kubo sneaked up behind him and poked his back. Startled, Shiraishi turned to her and asked, half joking, "Is stalking me your new hobby?" Kubo just grinned. After all, where Shiraishi went, she would always follow. Kubo told Shiraishi not to flatter himself. She explained she only came to the library to return a book, but once she spotted him sitting there, she just had to say hi. Noticing the pile of books Shiraishi was struggling with, she immediately offered to help him study. Embarrassed, Shiraishi tried to refuse. He didn't want her to realize how hopeless he was. But Kubo wouldn't take no for an answer. She even borrowed someone's glasses to play the role of a strict teacher and plopped down next to him. Shiraishi was shocked when she actually started teaching instead of teasing. Her explanations were simple and clear. For once, he was grateful he let her help. Maybe. Studying wasn't as hopeless as he thought when Kubo was by his side. Before they left, they agreed to meet again for another study session the next day. Unfortunately, Shiraishi got sick overnight. He messaged Kubo, letting her know he couldn't make it. Worried, Kubo texted him asking if he'd be strong enough to attend school soon. Shiraishi was typing a reply when suddenly Seda, his little brother, stormed into his room, snatched the phone, and accidentally sent Kubo a sticker that said, "I miss you." Kubo was speechless. Mortified, Shiraishi hurried to explain what had happened. But Kubo wasn't going to let him off that easily. She cheekily sent back a "lonely without you" sticker herself, joking that Akina must have sent it. The next morning, Shiraishi returned to school but was late. Not wanting to disrupt class, he decided to wait outside. Just then, Kubo walked out, looking awfully pale. She stumbled, almost falling onto Shiraishi, and apologized, explaining she was on her way to the nurse's office. Concerned, Shiraishi offered to go with her. When they arrived, the nurse wasn't there yet, so Shiraishi helped Kubo lie down and tucked her in with a blanket. She thanked him sleepily and passed out almost instantly. A few minutes later, the nurse arrived. After making sure Kubo was in good hands, Shiraishi was sent back to class. Fast forward 1 week, the final exams were over. And guess what? Shiraishi had actually passed. He knew he owed it all to Kubo, so he sincerely thanked her for taking the time to tutor him. Outside, a torrential downpour was waiting for them. Kubo, being the smart one, had brought an umbrella. Shiraishi hadn't. Naturally, Kubo offered to share. As they walked together under the small umbrella, Shiraishi grew self-conscious. What if people saw them together and thought they were a couple? Trying to avoid that awkward situation, he suggested taking a quieter route home. But when they reached a crosswalk, Kubo grinned mischievously and asked, "Did you pick this quiet path on purpose? To advance the plot with me?" Shiraishi's ears turned bright red. He stammered a denial, but Kubo just smiled teasingly, clearly enjoying his embarrassment. When they eventually split ways, Kubo went home where Akina was waiting. She teased her about visiting over the weekend. That Saturday, Shiraishi spotted Sae struggling with grocery bags. He offered to help, but Sae stubbornly refused at first. However, seeing her determination reminded him of Seda, so he insisted. As they walked toward Kubo's house, Sae explained she was planning to cook a special dish for Kubo, but couldn't find all the ingredients she needed. Shiraishi messaged Kubo to check if she had the missing ingredients. Kubo, unaware of the full story, found the request odd but quickly responded that she did. Concerned for Sae's safety, she rushed out to find them. Not long after, she spotted Shiraishi and Sae together, bags in hand. Grateful, Kubo thanked Shiraishi warmly. Meanwhile, Sae and Kubo teased him lightly, but he managed to stay composed. Barely. The following week at school, Shiraishi, bored during class, started fiddling with his pen. Of course, he managed to lose the spring inside it. Kubo, watching the whole thing, sighed and called him an idiot, before lending him her own pen with an exasperated smile. Some things never changed. After class ended, Shiraishi tried returning Kubo's pen, but Kubo simply told him to keep it. She had another one and liked the idea of them having matching pens. As he packed his things, he overheard Kubo and her friends planning a sleepover at Hazuki's place. So, Shiraishi walked home alone as usual. That night, the girls gathered for their sleepover. They snacked, chatted about finals, and laughed about finally surviving their first year. But then Hazuki dropped the news. Next year, they'd be reshuffled into different classes. Tama panicked, clutching onto her best friends like a drowning sailor. The girls reassured her that no matter what, they'd still be inseparable. But while the others laughed, Kubo zoned out, quietly worrying about Shiraishi. What if they didn't end up in the same class? When her friends caught her spacing out, she brushed it off, but they definitely noticed something was up and teased her to no end. A few days later, Shiraishi and Seda went shopping for their mom. Along the way, they ran into, guess who, Kubo, Akina, and Sae. Kubo was the first to spot them and cheerfully approached, while Seda, ever polite, greeted her sweetly. Shiraishi, meanwhile, was dying inside from social anxiety. Sae soon joined them and the group momentarily split up. Shiraishi introduced Seda to Sae, and although the little guy was shy at first, Sae quickly won him over. But then they noticed Akina watching from the shadows like a suspicious raccoon. She stepped out, smirking and teasing the group for how close they seemed. After some light roasting, Sae invited Shiraishi to join them for a picnic the next day. The following morning, Sae stopped by Kubo's house. Akina told her that Kubo was, rather dangerously, in the kitchen trying to cook. Sae, knowing full well how disastrous that could be, rushed in to help. And it was a good thing too, Kubo had already nicked her finger with the knife. So Sae took over the cooking duties while Kubo did her best not to burn down the kitchen. When the food was ready, they met up with Shiraishi and Seda at the park. They laid out a picnic blanket and began enjoying the meal. Akina even spoon-fed Seda, proudly declaring that Sae had made the food. The little boy was delighted. But then Akina, buzzed from the juice or maybe just being Akina, started teasing Shiraishi. At one point, she even lifted her shirt a bit too far, flashing her grades by accident. Kubo stormed off, visibly upset. Shiraishi, thinking she was mad at him, chased after her to apologize. But Kubo clarified she was actually mad at Akina for acting like an unhinged exhibitionist. Just when she was about to walk away, Seda tugged on her dress. With his big, sad puppy eyes, he convinced her to make peace with Shiraishi. So she returned, apologized, and they rejoined the group. Back at the blanket, Kubo looked at Shiraishi and asked softly, "Do you want to be in the same class with me next year?" Shiraishi didn't answer, because instead, he started panicking internally for no apparent reason. 2 weeks later, the new school year began. And guess what? Shiraishi, Kubo, Tama, and Hazuki all ended up in the same class. Crisis averted. During the opening orientation, the teacher asked for volunteers for the environmental committee. Kubo asked Shiraishi if he wanted to do it again this year. Apparently, last year, Shiraishi took care of the flower bed so well that the flowers bloomed beautifully. But since no one ever noticed him, they just assumed it was one of the school's 7 wonders. Shiraishi said he wasn't sure if he wanted to volunteer again. So Kubo raised her hand for both of them. When the teacher asked for a male volunteer, Kubo pointed to Shiraishi and said, "He's raising his hand," even though he absolutely wasn't. The teacher walked over and apologized to Shiraishi, saying that, just like last year, he still hadn't noticed him. After he walked off, Shiraishi noticed that Kubo was smiling to herself. He narrowed his eyes. What was this mischievous witch plotting now? So, he asked why she even joined the environmental committee. With a straight face, she replied, "Because I want to learn gardening from you." Yeah. From the guy who once watered a plastic plant for 2 weeks. Later that day, Shiraishi overheard some guys talking about his decision to join the committee. They claimed he was just sucking up to Kubo. But one student, Sudo, defended him, saying he genuinely believed Shiraishi was the male version of Poison Ivy. Apparently, he assumed Shiraishi was some kind of silent nature god. The other boys weren't convinced. They reminded Sudo that his own class garden died last year, so maybe he wasn't the best person to judge. Meanwhile, in science class, Shiraishi found out that both Kubo and Sudo were in his lab group. Talk about destiny or torture. Sudo was fumbling for an eraser, clearly struggling. Shiraishi, being the indecisive mess he is, wanted to lend him one but didn't know how to break the silence. Kubo, the social sniper, saw right through his hesitation and loudly asked to borrow an eraser from Shiraishi. This caught Sudo's attention. He looked over, saw that Shiraishi had 5 erasers in his pencil case, and laughed like it was the most ridiculous thing ever. But then he admitted he wanted to ask Shiraishi for gardening advice because he thought the guy was untouchable. Later, Shiraishi thanked Kubo for helping him talk to someone besides her for once. He admitted it was refreshing, the small joys of human interaction. Later that evening, Shiraishi went to grab a drink from the vending machine when Kubo popped up behind him like a ninja ghost. He nearly choked on his own soul. After apologizing for the jump scare, they walked home together, chatting about what kind of life someone would need to live to be considered a lemon-flavored drink. Yeah, that was the actual topic. Shiraishi claimed lemon-flavored people are the sociable types, which meant he could never be one. He had no friends. Just NPC energy all day, every day. Kubo, visibly offended, asked, "So, I'm just an accessory to you? Not even a friend?" Oof, the boy had done it again. Emotionally drop-kicked the girl who clearly had feelings for him. But he caught himself and apologized. Then, in the most painfully awkward way imaginable, asked her, "Wait, are we friends?" Luckily, Kubo knew he was about as emotionally fluent as a stone wall. So she smiled and confirmed, "Yes, Shiraishi, we're friends." And that made his whole day. A few days later, Shiraishi stuck his head out the classroom window for some fresh air, until his classmates slammed the blackboard erasers against the opposite window, sending a gust of chalk straight into his face. He didn't even get mad, just coughed in silence like a confused ghost. He left to clean up, but before he could find a mirror, Kubo appeared again, this time ready to help dust him off. Without hesitation, she reached up and started cleaning his hair, which made his heart do backflips. Completely unaware of what her closeness was doing to him, she commented on how thick his hair was, then asked him to feel hers in return. Then came the question, what kind of hairstyle do you like on girls? Shiraishi, blushing like a kid caught with a love letter, mumbled that he liked ponytails, especially on her. Kubo quietly filed that info away, probably for the next day. Later, during their last class, the teacher mentioned that physical fitness tests would be held the next day. After class, Kubo dragged Shiraishi to the staircase, claiming they needed to measure their heights against each other. She lined him up against the wall and used a ruler. Then they switched places. He noticed that she was ever so slightly looking up at him. It made his brain short-circuit. Lost in thought, he accidentally stared at her like she was a steak dinner. Kubo snapped him out of it, and when he awkwardly apologized for the intense staring, she grabbed his shirt and said, "If I don't do this, you'll run away from me, just like your ex did," which was hilarious because everyone knows Shiraishi never even had an ex. Right after she let go of his shirt, Shiraishi did what any totally normal, emotionally stable high schooler would do. He bolted out of the building like the place was on fire. Out of breath and emotionally disoriented, he realized something. He had taken Kubo's ruler with him. Meanwhile, Kubo stood there, her stomach fluttering with butterflies. She couldn't believe how close they had just been. He, traumatized, her, deliriously in love. The next day, Shiraishi returned the ruler like it was a cursed object, handing it off as fast as humanly possible and walking away without another word. Smooth, as always. Later, before their physical fitness tests, Kubo asked to borrow his jaquetto compare heights, which obviously was code for, "Let me wrap myself in the scent of your deodorant." When she tried it on, she realized just how tall Shiraishi was. The jacket practically swallowed her whole. Kubo sat down with her knees tucked in, sulking about being shorter. Shiraishi, bless his hopeless heart, heard none of this. He was too busy staring at her bare thighs, having a crisis. Realizing where his eyes were locked, he panicked and looked away. When he glanced back, she had vanished. Seconds later, her voice echoed from the window above, "We're late, idiot." Later in the gym, Tama whined to her friends about gaining weight and confessed she hadn't eaten all morning. Kubo asked how she even survived until now, since Tama practically worshipped food. Tama wished she had Kubo's metabolism. Kubo, ever the self-deprecating queen, muttered, "Yeah, I gain weight, just not in the places that matter." This, of course, made her friends glance down at her tragically flat chest. To avoid any suspicions, she claimed the oversized jacket she was wearing belonged to her sister. Right then, two girls walked past. One of them proudly said she was wearing her boyfriend's jacket. After they left, Kubo sniffed Shiraishi's jacket, discreetly, like a total weirdo. Days later, Aina found Shiraishi trailing behind Seda on his first solo errand. She told him not to be so sneaky, no one could see him anyway. Shiraishi explained that people built resistance to his invisibility after spending too much time with him. Yes, the tragic reality of proximity immunity. After Seda completed his errand, buying eggs of course, Aina wrapped him in a proud big sister hug. She even shared the story of Kubo's first errand, how she tripped, smashed the eggs, and cried all the way home until Aina rubbed her head for 30 minutes straight. She told Shiraishi to do the same if Kubo ever cried in front of him. Great, now he's got pressure and responsibilities. That night, Shiraishi casually told Kubo about Seda's success, which reminded her of her tragic egg quest. She immediately pouted, and Aina had to give her the legendary head pats again. Kubo mumbled something about how it would be better if her crush were the one doing the comforting. Aina jumped on that line, asking who exactly she was talking about. Kubo ignored her and changed the subject. Classic. The following week, Shiraishi was reading about the movie adaptation of his favorite manga when bam, Kubo popped up from beneath his desk like a ninja squirrel. He nearly died of fright. When he recovered, she asked what had his attention. He told her about the movie and she casually suggested they go see it together, as in a date. Shiraishi agreed, and on the weekend, they met at the train station. Kubo arrived late, but Shiraishi, being the liar he is, claimed he'd just gotten there too. She grabbed his hands and said they were cold. Liar confirmed. Still, she gave him a small gift. He was surprised, until she told him it was so they could exchange presents. Problem, he hadn't brought anything. She gave him 30 minutes to find something. He panicked. He searched. He struggled. But eventually he got her a pair of gloves. Kubo loved the gift. Her gift, a yellow t-shirt that said main character in bold letters. She immediately regretted it. But Shiraishi, being the kind soul he is, reassured her. it was the thought that mattered. After the movie, while walking around town, 3 random guys approached Kubo and asked her out. Typical. Kubo looked uncomfortable, until Shiraishi stepped in like a ghost knight in school uniform. The guys jumped back in shock. "Who's this ghost?" they asked. "I've been here the whole time," he deadpanned. "Wait, is this your boyfriend?" one asked. Kubo smiled, grabbed Shiraishi's hand, and said, "Yes." The boys stood there, stunned. After all, they couldn't believe a girl like her would choose someone who looked like a socially anxious raisin. But she did, and that's the part that mattered. Surprisingly, the 3 guys who had just hit on Kubo weren't total jerks. Once they saw her holding hands with Shiraishi and heard her call him her boyfriend, they simply wished him luck and walked away like respectful NPCs. Later, over the phone, Kubo confessed that the encounter had shaken her a bit, so Shiraishi, in a rare moment of courage, told her that everything would be fine now, because he was there. Eventually, the 2 made it to the mall. They tried to buy tickets for the movie, but the current session was fully booked. Kubo didn't mind. She said she was fine going home late, as long as they were together. Smooth. To kill time, they explored the mall and dropped by a cafe. Kubo insisted on ordering the same drink as Shiraishi because, well, she was curious. She took 1 sip of the plain black coffee and instantly regretted it. To fix the taste, she tried his drink, only to discover it was also black coffee. Disaster. Feeling guilty, Shiraishi ran off to grab cream and sugar for her, like the gentleman he was slowly becoming. After the cafe, they wandered through an arcade and a clothing store before racing back to catch their movie. While watching, Kubo kept sneaking glances at Shiraishi, who was completely absorbed in the film, unaware of everything. Afterward, she confessed something. She'd been fascinated watching his face change during the movie, expressions so vivid, she could hardly believe he was the same shy boy from school. Shiraishi admitted something too. He didn't smile at school because he was scared that if people ever did notice him, it would be when he was smiling to himself like a lunatic. But Kubo told him it didn't matter. She could read him like an open book, smiles, frowns, or deadpan stares. That night, Shiraishi walked Kubo home. Before they said goodbye, she asked him if he'd like to go out again. Of course, he said yes. So she made him promise with a pinky swear. A week later, at school, Kubo proposed they take a psychology compatibility quiz she saw on a TV show. The first question, "What would you scream in a dream?" Shiraishi answered, "Yahoo!" Kubo burst out laughing, saying that if he screamed that long enough, he'd sound like Brook from One Piece. Also, she added it would definitely attract a bear. Next question, "How many flowers do you imagine blooming?" Shiraishi said 1. Kubo said a lot. Apparently, that answer represented how many people you'd fall in love with in your life. Meaning Shiraishi was a one-heart kind of guy. And Kubo, well, she blushed hard and ran out of the room. Days later, Shiraishi was lost in thought during class, dreaming of birthday cake since it was his special day. His stomach rumbled loudly, and the whole class turned to look at him. Of course, Kubo teased him, but then gave him a chocolate bar. He looked at it and saw a birthday message written on the wrapper. Touched, he asked how she even knew. She reminded him of the time her sister gave her his student ID. But that wasn't all. She gave him another chocolate with a note, "Check your locker." Inside, he found a small, pink figure, and he just stared at it silently. Kubo assumed he hated it, until he smiled and thanked her, saying she was the first person outside his family to ever give him a birthday gift. After school, Shiraishi walked alone, wondering why Kubo could see him when no one else could. At that exact moment, Kubo looked out her classroom window, watching him walk away. She remembered the first time she saw him, in a middle school yearbook photo, badly photoshopped into the corner, as if even the school photographer hadn't noticed he was there. And yet, for her, Shiraishi had never once been invisible. Tama once said that Shiraishi had a special ability, one that made him invisible to everyone around him. But from the very first day of high school, Kubo saw him. She noticed something strange. People barely reacted to his presence, and when she finally spoke to him, the shock on his face was priceless. That reaction alone made her want to talk to him more. But now that she truly knows him, Kubo realizes one thing. Even if she tried, she could never take her eyes off Shiraishi again. Do you think Kubo and Shiraishi have a future together? If you made it to the end, comment watermelons below, and if you enjoy anime recaps like this one, make sure to check out the next video on screen. That's it for today's episode. If you liked it, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and comment if you want to see the next part. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.